Well, we're here today with REIF LARSEN, who's the author of the selected works of T.S. Spivet. And it is a remarkable novel with lots of interesting treatments in the pages, and there's a whole different layout to this book than other books, which we'll talk about in a minute. But we should first talk about the main character, Tecumseh Sparrow Spivet, who's a 12-year-old cartographic genius. Really interesting character, a young boy. Where did the idea first for this character come to you?
Well, I was interested in the West and particularly cowboys and why cowboys have been so enduring in American history. You know, they were like the true American cowboy was only around for about 15 or 20 years in the 19th century before barbed wire kind of cut up the whole country. And yet, of course, there was the renaissance of Westerns in the 40s and 50s, and then, you know, even today, people are using cowboy terminology very loosely. And so I was interested in exploring why this archetype of the cowboy has been so enduring in our mythology, why it captures our imagination still, you know, long after kind of the true cowboys are gone. And I knew I wanted to explore it from kind of the back door, from the son of a cowboy who's himself not actually a cowboy. And actually, it's a funny story. I looked at some of my false starts, you know, because all novelists have these false starts where they maybe try to find out the voice of the book and fail miserably. And I think originally T.S. was this 57-year-old drunk who was narrating his life from a Parisian prison and kind of reminiscing about the West.
That's quite different.
Yeah, and I looked back and I was like, oh God, I'm glad I did not go down that route. But eventually I figure out, no, actually he's 12 and he's still on the ranch. He's still in this kind of playground of the West because the Coppertop Ranch it's a real ranch in some sense, but it's also this kind of playground of the imagination and, you know, intentionally steeped in mythology of the West. And I thought it was important that T.S. possesses a kind of range of ways of seeing the world and processing the world that was very different from his father, who's the classic laconic cowboy, you know, who's run completely by intuition and kind of can, you know, know how to irrigate the land just by you know the sixth sense. And whereas T.S. is like an intense empiricist, and he'll map every square foot of that land to find out where the water goes. And so once I found out this voice of T.S., that he's this kind of hyper-analytical kid in this land of intuition and silence out west, then it's almost like the book started writing itself.
This character is one of the most unique characters I run across in books this year. I mean, it's just an unusual boy, obviously, against an unusual backdrop. And you mentioned it was the West. It's Divide, Montana, which is out west. It feels almost like an old Western novel, the way you've written it, but it takes place in the modern day. It takes place today, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, yeah. And that was intentional in many ways because I did a lot of research for this book, obviously, because I knew little about the West. I'm not from the West, I'm from Brooklyn, but I've spent a lot of time out there. And you know, I didn't know much about 19th century science or maps or so forth. So, but going out there, I wanted to be steeped in the literature of the West because there's been a lot of it, you know, and Annie Proulx and Richard Ford and Cormac McCarthy and, you know, all these Stegner, all these amazing writers. And so I kind of intentionally, like there was one week where I sat down and watched 25 Westerns in a row, you know, and so I think I started walking around with a kind of like
little swagger.
Yeah, the pigeon-toed, yeah, swagger. And they're amazing. I mean, there's you know, there's real formula to them, but there was a reason why they kind of capture the imagination. So in this book, I intentionally kind of paid tribute to the Western.